PlayStation used to be such a great hub for 3D platformers. We used to be seeing Sony put money into all kinds of these weird games, many of which became some of the most recognized and celebrated games ever. But with each and every console they put out, it seemed like we were getting further and further away from that kind of thing. On PS3, half of those devs are making 3D platformers. They're now putting full stock and making realistic AAA blockbusters, which was really awesome for a while, but after so much time passed, it just started to feel like all those little goobers were getting left behind. Not to say we didn't have any of that stuff on PS3, just a lot less. And even less on PS4. The PS5's been the absolute worst for this, though. I mean, sure, we got a big shiny new Ratchet & Clank, but even with all the super duper graphics, it's still Ratchet & Clank like 11, you know? As good as those games are, they are all pretty similar, so I just get the sense of been there, done that. Sackboy's not bad. It is a solid co-op platformer harkening a little bit to Mario 3D World, but that's pretty much it. There's nothing else but these AAA ridiculously over-budgeted photorealistic games sucking up every drop of budget that used to be divided across so many more types of games. Like, I do love my PS5, but I find myself sorely missing all of the weirdo stuff they'd publish in between the big games, platformers especially, because that is what makes the brand special. It's not just about the huge hitters, you gotta have all the little weirdos and critters dancing around them too. And, you know, while it may not be a Sly Cooper or Ape Escape game, we did finally get something. Astro Bot, a game hell-bent on reminding us how cool Sony used to be. Okay, not to be too cynical, I actually do really like Astro Bot quite a bit. Most people probably know him from that Playroom demo game thing that came bundled with every PS5, but before that, he had his very own VR game on the PS4. Originally starting as one of the mini-games in the Playroom VR, a free app that you could download for your original PSVR, it then spun off into a full game, Astro Bot Rescue Mission. It was a really novel idea. I mean, most VR games you were in first person, but this was one that gave you the eyes of a tall robot following the main character. As you use the controller to move Astro Bot, the physical movement of your head and hands would translate to the actions of the character you actually are. I guess in a sense it wasn't a third-person game, but a second-person game. But what made it so dang cool were all the different creative ways you would physically interact with Astro Bot. Every power-up became part of the controller, so maybe you were shooting stuff with a water gun, maybe shooting out ninja stars to make platforms to jump up, or my favorite, the grapple hook, allowing you to physically latch onto the environment, bring it down for Astro Bot to jump on, and then fling him up into the air. It was so cool. It was like nothing else I've ever played. But what gave it such a big place in my heart was how overwhelmingly adorable it was. Just pure joy oozing out of every pore of the experience. Leave it to Japan's studio to put together something real magical. Made it all the sadder to see Sony close them down. It's the money they want, not magic. I mean, we live in a world where 5 million copies sold apparently isn't enough for these big companies anymore. Team Asobi, however, a smaller sub-studio within Japan's studio, did survive. The group of devs that brought us Astro Bot Rescue Mission got to stick around to keep stirring that big bubbling pot of video game magic. Yeah, it's a little bit sad, the current state of the industry, but hey, let's not try to focus too much on that. Astro Bot is real! I got it right here! It happened! It got made even under these dire circumstances. A high-budget 3D platformer from PlayStation, just like the good old days. And from what I've been seeing so far, the reaction to this thing has been overwhelmingly positive. I've even seen some people call it Mario Galaxy 3. When I saw the trailer, I kind of did have a flat reaction to it. It just kind of felt inevitable, you know, and having already played the VR game, which, yeah, it just kind of looked like the same game, but not in VR. Now, mind you, these reactions I've been mostly seeing from people that definitely did not play the VR version. Now, to me, I just kind of saw a version of this game that didn't look as interesting. You know, you remove the thing that made it so cool. Does this just become sort of a generic platformer when you do that? I don't know. I was really interested in seeing how well they could pull it off and make it unique and different when you don't have that one big component that just automatically makes it so different. I did just complete the game fully last night, beat the game, got 100% and everything. I pretty much picked through every last bone in this thing's body, so hey, let's do a little ramble and tell you what I what I thought about it. So the premise here is pretty much exactly the same as the VR game. You're just a little robot in space, and then this dickhead alien guy comes and wrecks your ship, and now it's a collectathon to find all the pieces to your ship while rescuing all of the lost robots along the way. As for the gameplay, it is exactly the same as that VR game, and I mean identical in the way it feels, all of the moveset. You got your jump, a simple punch, you can grab stuff and pull on it using the punch button, and you got that little laser hover. I really love this move. I thought it was really cool back then. I still think it's a really good move. I really appreciate when some of your basic moves are capable of doing more than one thing, and this thing doubles as, you know, a way to slow your descent to make landing a little bit easier, but you can also use it to break boxes or defeat enemies or just attack whatever's beneath you. And since the lasers go all the way to the surface you would land on if you let go of the button, it's also like super easy to tell where exactly you're going to land. I always thought this was one of the best hover moves. I still do. It's still super fun to use. You can do a little spin attack by holding down the punch button, charging up and letting go. You can use this to drill down through cracks in the ground or just for attacking guys a little bit easier. And that's it. Very, very simple moveset, but a very effective one. Now, what made every level so interesting in the VR game were the power-ups. Now, the power-ups are completely different. It's not about changing what the controller can do, it's about changing what Astro Bot can do, of course. So this time, you're going to be getting all of these different things that you can control with the R2 and L2 buttons. Firstly, we got the double punch, and this thing feels fantastic. You ever play Sonic Unleashed in the way how they're like, yeah, R button punches your right hand, L button punches your left hand? Imagine a version of that that feels really good and is really fun to play with. The adaptive triggers and everything too make this feel amazing. That the spring noise is coming from the controller. This is one of the very, very few games that actually gets a lot out of this controller. I appreciate it doing that. You'll be walking around punching bad guys in the face, knocking everything around, breaking stuff. Feels like Lego Star Wars, knocking all the tiny particles all around. Feels so satisfying. You can also latch on to certain enemies, pull them down and rip them out, or you can grapple onto these little sticky rotating poles to swing around and jump off. Okay, first power-up's pretty good. You can do multiple things with it, and each action is really satisfying. Okay, what else do we got? Monkey symbols. Hit the button and the level will shift in one way or another. It kind of reminds me of the way the spin in certain Mario Galaxy levels would flip the platforms. It's like that, but a little bit easier. I do like how the drums and stuff all react to it. That's kind of cool. The rocket chicken is one of the best ones. You hold down the R2 button, charge up, and blast into the air. Really reminds me of the rocket nozzle from Mario Sunshine. A lot of you are probably thinking that. Feels a little bit more rigid. It's not quite as fluid as Mario's, but it still does feel very good. And I love how you can jump off and hover and then use it, or you can use it first and then keep the hover for the landing. This one's also really fun for exploration because you're always looking around for like harder to get to platforms that you can maybe just barely get to by using it. The balloon power-up I also like for similar reasons. Very fun to try and find out-of-the-way platforms with it. You can also plug the nozzle into one of these guys and blow them up like it's Dig Dug. Again, they're trying to make sure that most of the power-ups have more than one function. I really do like that. Oh, one of the coolest ones is the sponge power-up. So I kind of appreciate that we're not just pretending this guy has to be made out of metal. He's a cartoon character. Do cartoon stuff to him, so he's just turning into a sponge. When you absorb water, you turn really big and you can jump way further, run way faster, destroy things better. Then you can wring yourself out, trying to make other things absorb that water to create platforms or maybe move water from one area to another, and at the same time making yourself smaller to get through the regular platforming parts that you can't be big for. You're bringing water from point A to point B, but you're also thinking about the size of your character. Another one that does two things. Good ass game design. Vacuum power-up's pretty cool. You can suck stuff up and put it beneath you like a platform. Very similar to Cloud Mario from Mario Galaxy 2, just without the floatiness to it. Though with this thing, you can make two different types of platforms depending on what substance you sucked up. The regular platforms you do with this stuff, but you can also suck up honey to make bouncy platforms. Probably one of the least interesting ones is the time slowdown power-up. It's just something I've seen in so many games. Psychonauts 2 had it, Crash Bandicoot 4 had it, and Hat in Time had it. I can probably think of more. And, you know, it's kind of cool, the situation, the idea of something suddenly slowing down, and now you get to interact with it. But all this ever really amounts to in any game I've used it in is just hit the button when you have to, and then jump. It doesn't really feel like it's actually adding anything. It's not making me do anything. Yeah, it's the same case here. Most of these obstacles are just, yeah, obviously hit the button and then you can do the platforms. Sometimes you have to time it, and that's kind of cool. Though I will give this game credit credit where it is due, this does have some of the most interesting instances of this where, you know, there are a couple of times, usually to find the side stuff, where it's really not that obvious to stop time. So I do at least appreciate that they figured out how to make it a little less obvious, just because, I don't know, it just feels so reactionary. It feels like Simon Says usually, so at least they got it a little further, but I do still overall think there is a more interesting power-up you could have done instead, but oh well. The light bulb one I also didn't find all that neat. It just makes the platforms appear before you, but like, there's nothing to it other than just, yeah, you can now see what you need to jump on. It feels like a poor man's light bulb Yoshi thing from Mario Galaxy 2. That one, it was shrinking, you had to keep collecting the fruit, it actually kind of mattered which way you were facing. Here, it's like, as long as you have it, the platforms are there. I don't know, it doesn't really feel like it's actually making me do anything. My absolute favorite one, though, is the shrink power-up. Shrink way down, and suddenly you're looking at the whole world from a different angle, and this is one of the few games where, like, all that super-duper graphics, all of those details kind of matter here. You shrink down, and everything is still all that detailed. It feels like this was a world also crafted for the experience, for you to platform around. Coming up to what just feels like a freaking wall, and it's like, what do I do here? Shrink down, and it's like, oh my god, I can go up here, up this plants, up the little bricks and stuff. Maybe you'll walk into something and then grow really big to destroy it. Maybe you'll get an Astro Bot out of a cage this way, or maybe you'll rip the blankets off after you had to shrink down and go through the little opening. It's a really cool power-up, and they think of a lot of really fun things to do with it. I also love the way he, like, poof, against the walls when he tried to, like, grow big in a place that he can't. That's really cute. I think there's a couple of other power-ups I'm probably not thinking of right now. Sorry, it's a Ramble video, not a real review, so it's not as organized, but that's the gist of it. They feel more like Mario Galaxy power-ups, where it's like, okay, this level you have this mechanic. It's not really about having a crutch or making the game easier. It's about just changing what your character can do just for a little bit so the stage can be totally different than what you played before. And yeah, they do a fantastic job. Every stage feels like it's doing its own thing, and if you ever get to a stage where you're using a power-up you already did before, it feels like this time they're doing it in a kind of a new way. Again, I totally understand the Mario Galaxy comparisons when it comes to level design and what your character can do. It actually is quite similar. Like, it doesn't play the same way at all, but I guess when you're talking about, like, game design philosophy, there's a lot of really brilliant crossover. As I mentioned before, the PlayStation 5 controller, the way this thing feels to use, the sound effects coming out of it, the adaptive triggers, every single power-up feels so different to use, and it does sound a little gimmicky, but when you have the hands on the controller and you push the buttons, it kind of adds to the game feel, because haptics, physical sensations. Okay, I always think game feel is like when a game stimulates multiple of your senses at once. Like, for example, it's a little faster to read something if it has a rumble sound and visual cue all together instead of just the visual cue. Think about Animal Crossing 1. The fishing's a little harder because there wasn't a sound with the splash, but later Animal Crossing games, it felt better because there is a sound with the splash, 2 layers of stimuli for you to react to. That's kind of how I think game feel is. I don't know, having that extra layer of, I don't know, stimulus in your hands when you're using these things, it really goes a long way. Even different surfaces you walk on physically feel completely different. This is the most I've been able to realize, like, what this controller can do. This whole game was definitely designed around what the DualSense is capable of, and in a way that's more than just what the Playroom did. Like, the Playroom felt more like, hey, this is what this can do. Astro Bot, the full game, feels more like, okay, this is how it can make a game feel. Every power-up, you know what you're doing. The muscle memory just slaps together so much faster because of those extra little pieces of feedback. Feedback's the word I'm looking for. Though it does make the gameplay footage a little bit weird to listen back to, because I didn't realize how many of the sound effects were not coming out of the TV. Like, listen to this. All of those missing sounds come out of the controller, and I didn't even realize that because of how clear they sound. I remember the days when the controller speakers sounded like garbled garbage. You click on Captain Falcon, he'd be like, and that was what we got. But now you get this really interesting effect where the sounds are just as clean as the rest of the game, but they sound closer to you, and combined with all of the haptics getting across, the footstep sounds, and just, I guess, the little vibration sensations that are like anything interacting with Astro Bot, those two things together, what's happening to Astro Bot feels and sounds closer to you than everything else you haven't walked up to yet. It's a really surreal feeling that I've only experienced using this controller on this game. I don't think it's like the most it kind of matters sort of thing, but it is genuinely really cool, and it is something you could look forward to when deciding whether or not to pick this one up. Oh, some of the power-ups from the VR version actually do make a return in the shape of these little mounted turrets. You'll come up to a controller thingy, put your controller in it, and you'll be able to just, from a standstill, use the ninja stars or the water or whatever you're using. I think it was a cool way to have those things still in the game as like a quick idea, because that's what it's all about. It's about having a million different ideas, and you move on to the next one again and again and again and again, just like Mario Galaxy. Though, of course, using these power-ups was so much cooler in the VR version. Honestly, overall, I think the power-ups were cooler in the VR version, but they are still a lot of fun to use in this game, and they do make the most out of the level design. This is the part of the video where I've been standing in front of the camera for half an hour and the lights are starting to make me sweat. My hair starts to look like Mr. Noodles. Mr. Noodles? What's the cheese string? Cheese string hair. You'll have to deal with looking at that. We're looking at that. What am I talking about? Where was it? Level design. Okay, level design. Pretty similar to the VR game, though there are a lot of improvements that come with the ability to look around with the right stick instead of being locked kind of to more of a track and just relying on your head movement. It has been a while since I did play the VR version, but I do feel like the exploration is better here. The off-beaten paths are a little more interesting to find and interesting to take, and I think, yeah, having the freedom of really being able to look all around anywhere you want, having no restriction on that, does make looking for things a little bit more engaging. As cool as it was, like, physically feeling like you're there and you're looking at stuff, it was kind of a different experience, but overall I do think the exploration, the freedom does aid that a lot. And of course, as you make your way through each level, you gotta keep your eyes peeled for all those robots that need rescuing. I love how a lot of them are just kind of doing random stuff. It actually reminds me a lot of Ape Escape. Some of these guys are just in plain sight, some are tucked away in a little secret, or maybe you gotta interact with something in an unobvious way to find one. A lot of them are just rewards for doing those off-beaten paths. It also does that new Super Mario Bros. Thing where it shows you which one you got in sequence, so you know like where to look in between if you missed one. Very, very handy. While making progress from level to level happens simply from beating the level, you will have to have rescued a certain amount of robots in order to tackle that world's boss. You also get a little bit of freedom of choice when it comes to picking which level you want to play next, because every time you beat one, you unlock two, and you only have to beat one to get to the next wave of levels. Though while this freedom of choice is really fantastic in games like Mario 64, it's like, oh, I'm having trouble finding this star in this level, I'll go to a different level instead, and then you only need half of the stars to beat the game. I didn't really feel like it mattered as much, because every level I didn't have a problem with. Every level I was just able to kind of go through first try. I mean, it is kind of it's a kid's game, right? It's not going to be the most challenging thing in the world. So it's like, you do have that freedom, but you're just going to play every level anyway, so it doesn't really matter as much as it does in like a Mario game. Though I do like how the game's progression is down to a combination of finding stuff in the level and also completing the levels. It is a good excuse to look for those guys, because there's a lot of references to so many old PlayStation games that makes it even extra fun to look for them. And I love how you bring them all back to the hub world, and it gradually gets populated more and more with all the different robots. All the generic ones that are just regular robots, they all stay in the center trying to repair the PS5. I love seeing the chaos. I love all these guys doing jumping jacks for some reason, and this guy's tired. Like, there's so much detail in the animations and stuff. It's so wonderful. But all around on the outskirts, you got all of the different characters that are references to all the different PlayStation games. I'll try not to show too much. I guess I don't really want to spoil a whole lot, because part of the excitement is like, oh, who am I going to see next? Am I even going to recognize who I see next? There is a good amount of deep cuts. There's some stuff I really never expected to find in a million years here, and there's some stuff that I didn't even recognize. I had to look up, and I'm like, I don't even know what that game is. That was really neat. I really was expecting just the surface level stuff, just the AAAs, and then, you know, you have your Ape Escape and Vib Ribbon just to say we remember the old stuff. There's a lot. No, there's a lot of that stuff. The Gotcha Machine makes a return from Astro's Playroom, giving you something to do with all of those coins you pick up along the way, but this time I think the reward is even cooler. You get an item for one of those themed bots you rescued. For example, Psycho Mantis, you get him a PlayStation animation so he can use his mind to rumble the controller. Every single one is just a fun little reference, and you can then go out and then interact with them to see a brand new animation. The Resident Evil ones were my absolute favorite. They're just way too adorable. Chris trying to figure out how to use a typewriter, Jill being tormented by the dogs. Poor Claire can't figure out which frickin' key goes in it. Oh, but the right one's on the floor. Or the ground, I mean. And Leon, he's way too cool for the zombie. I'm trying to figure out this puzzle. Hold on a second. It's pretty obvious the amount of love and excitement that went into animating all of these little references. It feels like the games are actually culturally understood. It's not like they're just doing the thing from the game. It feels like they also kind of knew how it felt to actually engage with these old games. How people, what people came away from them with, what stories, you know what I mean? Oh my god, there was this really funny reaction. Apparently, the director of Days Gone, remember that game? Apparently he was such a nightmare to his staff that PlayStation made him take like anger management and stuff, and then they never worked with him again once that game was done. He was like complaining and whining, just bitching about like, oh, my character's reduced to an advertisement for a different game. Well, if they didn't include the Days Gone guy in this, you'd be saying the opposite. You'd be like, oh, so all the other PlayStation properties are valid, but not mine? This is a guy, I don't know. Unrelated to this video, this is not part of this video, I just thought that was a really funny reaction. This guy mad about his character being in this game. That was just silly. Though in that corner of conversation is a lot of people declaring this an adver game. This is just a product from a soulless corporation designed to remind you of all of the properties they own so you will engage with them and give them more money. Do I think it's that? No. I can totally see why people would think that. They haven't really developed the best track record as of late. They feel more corporate than ever, I know. And yeah, sure, I wouldn't even really be surprised if that was really the true reason why this game was greenlit by the higher-ups to begin with, sure. But the fact that they made so good on it, the fact that it was made by people that clearly put so much love into it, it is hard to feel that way when you're playing it. It just really does feel like this Smash Bros. Level of celebration of the history of games that we all love and cherish. And besides, can it really be considered an advertisement when they don't tell you the name of the product? I mean, a lot of these games, they don't even tell you what they're from. Blinks, what are you doing? Just scratch the wall. You've driven me nuts. Why is it doing this? What was it talking about? A lot of the games, a lot of the characters, they don't even actually say what game they're from. That's why I had to look up the ones I didn't recognize. What are you doing? Please be good. All of the names of the robots themselves are like a reference. You still have to like get it, and that is part of the satisfaction. And that also leads to like really, I can just imagine the cool moments where like, it's a kid's game, right? The real demographic for this game is like people that aren't gonna get all these references, but imagine parents playing it with their kids, and their kids like, who's that guy? Who's this guy who's like, who's so funny with the zombie? And the guy gets like, oh, that's Leon S. Kennedy. That was on the PlayStation. It came out this year. I was this old when this came out. Think about all of the conversations that get to happen between parents and kids playing this because of the way they did this. So I kind of think it's sort of neat that they don't actually tell you who these guys are. At the same time, though, if you do want to get people to play these games, it's weird that you're not telling them that the name of this character you like looking at is this, and from this you can find it. So it is kind of a double-sided coin. Depends on how you look at it. Personally, I like it. You can just look up where the characters come from and play that game, seek it out if you want. The real problem is that Sony doesn't make it any easier to play these old games, but I'm gonna get into that later and not right now. We're gonna try not to show too many of them, just not to spoil them in case you want to save a lot of it for like a surprise for yourself. But I will say, I do have to say, did not expect Puppeteer. Did not expect Papa frickin' Tear. Remember that game on PS3? That was a really cool thing. One day I'll make a video about it, and then those like 4 people that keep asking me to review it can have their Christmas. A lot of references to the hardware too. Like you're gonna see every peripheral for every one of these systems. Even like you'll see a part, there's like a part where like the multi-tap flies by. They're even like showing the PlayStation VR headset alongside all of these old peripherals like the iToy and stuff. It had me getting nostalgic for the PS4. That was a really strange feeling. Good reminder that I just turned 30 freaking years old. Thanks, Sony. But it's like, oh my god, this thing's so old it's starting to yellow. How old am I? I just said I'm 30. But that was like a weird thing. Like I played the original Astro Bot on this thing, and here this game's making me
remember that time and feel nostalgic. I don't think that was possible. That was a weird thing. I also think Astro Bot's just character design works really well for this kind of cosplay thing in the same way that Sackboy's simplistic design worked really well. I do think Sackboy is a better character design than Astro Bot. I have seen a lot of people kind of say that they think Astro Bot is a pretty generic design. I wouldn't even really be inclined to disagree, honestly, but I think Astro Bot's design works the best in motion and when he's being used as kind of like a way to dress him up as a million different characters because it is a simple base. But when you're watching Astro Bot and all of the different robots animated, they're full of life and expression, just the eyeballs. I love characters that do all their expressions with just two big eyes. They have no other facial features, like Metabee from... Can I point at it? This is weird because of the previews backwards. Yeah, right here. Metabee for Metabots. It's like my favorite character design ever. I love the cracked out movement, just the overwhelming sense of joy that all of these characters are experiencing. In the way that, like, I don't know, they just kind of cycle through all of these cute little emotions, whether one's like a little scared or one's being like brave or one's just kind of chilling out. I don't know. They absolutely nail just that sense of endearment in all of the animations. Like, whoever was animating all these characters, you couldn't have done a better job. And that really does end up being a huge part of the experience, all of the little moments along the way. Like, it's kind of amazing seeing a budget used this way. Like, instead of making such a huge open world or modeling all 7,000 pores in Peter Parker's face, they made a modestly sized game and filled it to the brim with all of these magical moments. One of my favorite moments is right here. There's like this plant and you have to water it. Look how sad. It's dry. It needs water. We gotta help it. But what are these? What are these little robot ants? Oh, they're adorable. What do they do? It's like a whole organized effort. Like, they got a whole system going on here, trying to desperately do what they can to help this poor little plant. I was like almost crying tears of joy. Like, the game is full of so many little things you can walk up to and just go, aw, or like, ha, or like, I don't know. It's like a roller coaster with a million things going on. You gotta point at every single thing and go up and see what it's all about. So even if you are more into like the challenging stuff, the schmovement games like Pseudo Regalia or Mario 64 or stuff like that, it is totally still worth playing just for the overall experience, for the roller coaster ride with a billion different things you get to point at and go up to and just fall in love with. Though there are a couple of pretty hard levels that I had a freaking blast with. There's these optional challenge levels. This one here in particular, I freaking loved. It took me so many tries to get, and when I got that perfect run after learning it bit by bit and getting the hang of the muscle memory, oh, it was amazing. But overall, it is definitely more of a casual platformer. I mean, I could see it posing a decent challenge to younger players and a lot of people that haven't really brushed the skill ceiling of platformers yet, but you know, it's very much a family game. It's meant for everybody to be able to get into very easily, but if you are kind of someone like me who's played a ridiculous amount of platformers, it might feel a little autopilot for you. Again, it's just that kind of game. That's all. You just got to go into it knowing that, you know, if you are the kind of person that just wants something a little bit more mechanically complex or difficult, I could see those people skipping out on this, is all I'm saying. Otherwise, though, this is an amazing experience full of all of these exciting, bombastic moments. I could see maybe some people thinking it's a little bit style over substance, but I do think games geared this way are just as important as all the platformers that give you all the freedom and you know, ridiculous movesets. I think these more cinematic or like, I don't know, set piece type platformers are just as important. They may not be as replayable since there kind of is like one intended way to go through the level, not as much variety upon, you know, going through it again. But if it is telling of just how much people end up loving this game, how glued they get to it, how important it is for them to go through the whole thing and take all of it in and experience the full package, not only did I get the Platinum Trophy, not only did my wife get the Platinum Trophy, but every friend on my friends list who got the game at launch, all had the Platinum Trophy. Now, it isn't easy Platinum, you just have to get everything, but that's like a sizable package to make yourself go through, and the fact that people are so willing to do that, I think, is very emblematic of just how engaging and fun this thing is, even if it is a little linear and not the most replayable thing in the world. And you know, references aside, I also think it's the sheer staggering consistency of polish this game has that is unmatched by any platformers that aren't Mario Galaxy. Actually, no, Mario Galaxy 1 did have some annoying stuff. This game, it's weird to say it, has zero. Very strange to, you know, to imply that a game is perfect.
So I guess I don't mean like it's not perfect in the sense that every obstacle is the most interesting and challenging and the most fun thing you're ever going to play. I don't mean it's perfect like that, but I do think this is a perfect game in that every single inch of this thing's design is so carefully put together that I couldn't imagine a single human being ever having a single problem engaging with a single level at all. And that's one thing when your game is way more cinematic and you're kind of just holding forward, but this is a game where you interact with the things around you in a lot of different ways. Think about the amount of physics objects. Think about the amount of things that latch on and connect and never not connect, you know what I mean? And again, that could make the game sound a little bit too easy to you, but it also makes it one of the most consistent platformers I've ever played in my life. Like, this is what happens when you spend all 5 years of development on a modest scale instead of trying to make the hugest thing ever, because then you can make sure every level works all the time, while looking perfect and running perfect, and every physics object doesn't have a single hitch no matter what. It's kind of surreal playing something that does it to this degree.
Guess we should talk about the boss fights real quick, because I kind of forgot about those. All of the boss characters are actually the same characters from the VR game. You know, like the monkey and the snake and the bird, they're all the same characters, but the fights themselves are completely brand new. So in the VR game, every boss fight was centered around one of the controller power-ups. Same deal here, just obviously with one of Astro Bot's power-ups, and they do just as good a job of making them so exciting, full of these gargantuan moments, explosivity, and making the way you use that power-up that you were just playing a level with, using it in a brand new way to take on such a big boss is really, really well done. One thing I really appreciate about the boss fights in this game is, even though they do kind of adhere to that standard formula where it's like, survive the big attack wave, then you have the chance to hit, and then survive wave 2, then wave 3, it is that formula, but I feel like this game is so much better than most platformers I played at making Wave 1 feel so different from Wave 2, feeling so different from Wave 3. It builds upon each wave in a very satisfying way. It doesn't just feel like you're repeating the exact same series of obstacles to get the hit. I guess what I'm saying is boss fights feel very exciting and not as repetitive as I've seen this same formula of boss used in older platformers.
Hey, how about we enter full-on spoiler territory now, because I do want to talk about some levels that I think people probably would like to see blind. At the end of each world is a very special PlayStation-themed level. Skip here if you want to save it all for yourself, but I figured I'd go over it all real quick and give out my thoughts on each one. So the first one's Ape Escape, and this is easily my favorite one. You get a unique ability for each one, and this one's straight up the net from Ape Escape. You're running around catching all the monkeys. It makes so much sense. You're already rescuing robots, now they're just little monkeys dicking around. That's the PS1 level, and as for the PS2 level, we got God of War. This one's not bad. The item you get here is Kratos' axe. You can whack guys from far away, you can free stuff. I wish we got a little bit of old God of War representation, because this feels like it's supposed to be the PS2 representation, but then it's just like only new God of War stuff. As much as I do love the new God of War games. It is pretty fun overall though, you know, the level design's pretty good, and the power you have is pretty fun to work with. The Uncharted level I think was probably the most underwhelming. It's a fine level, but the upgrade in this one is just a gun, and all it really amounts to is, yeah, press the R2 trigger a bunch of times when the game tells you to knock all the guys off screen. I don't know, it's all auto-aim, and it really feels like the game's just doing it itself, and the location didn't feel particularly exciting. It's just an Aztec jungle. It didn't really feel like something that could only be in Uncharted, if that makes sense. Why not the train hanging off the cliff? I feel like there's way more iconic parts of Uncharted for them to do. The level itself isn't bad, it just doesn't really feel as special as the other ones, I guess is my real problem with it. So yeah, the Uncharted level I thought was just okay. Then we got the Loco Roco level. Dude, this is just straight up Loco Roco. You're like tilting the controller to move the stage and you're going through. It's literally Loco Roco. It is so adorable and wonderful, and it's a little linear and, you know, easy to know what to do at all times. It is pretty simple, but it is just so cute and colorful, and I don't know, it's pretty cool to see this be the PSP level. And then we have the Horizon level, which, you know, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't the most thrilled to see that be one of these. I've never played Horizon, nor have I ever really thought much ever about playing it at all. But it was a pretty good level. Like, it didn't have the same problem that the Uncharted one did, even though it is a similar setting, because, yeah, you got all these big dinosaur robot things. It looks like stuff that could only be from this game. The ability in this level is also just a lot more fun to use. It's a bow and arrow, and yeah, you actually get to aim it this time. You're actually doing something way more fun than the gun, and it's got gyro aim, and that's a little bonus right there. Also pretty satisfying the way the trigger feels like a resistance to the bow. I mean, I guess that is kind of gimmicky. That's probably the reason they wanted to have a bow item, was so the controller can do the thing. But overall, it is just really fun to have a simple projectile. It's good for taking out enemies, and it's just a different way you can interact with the environment and knocking stuff down or whatever. Didn't really care about the characters or what was going on, but the level itself, this was one of the better ones. But yeah, that's all of them. Pretty fun idea. It may be a little bit disappointing to see only 2 of the quirkier ones, and the other 3 are kind of like the bigger names. But honestly, I think we're kind of lucky that we got any of the weirdo stuff, so I'm thankful for a Loco Roco and Ape Escape level. I think an Infamous level would have been a lot more interesting for the PS3 level, but you know, they're obviously going to do Uncharted and Horizon and God of War, so it's like, whatever, there's still fun levels. But it does make you wonder what an Astro Bot game could look like if every level was remixing some idea from a different game. Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, you know, you got the references, sure, it's one thing. But I think other than that, just remixing so many different ideas from so many different games, I think that would be a really good way to give a platformer an absurd amount of variety. Sneaking through Sly Cooper, building stuff in Little Big Planet, cutting through stuff in a Puppeteer level. I don't know, I feel like you could do a lot of cool stuff with that. Make a level like The Last Guy. Remember that weird thing on PS3? Oh, what if they made a Trash Panic level? Now that would have been cool. Who remembers Trash Panic? Really cool idea for a game. No references to that here. That would have been a cool deep cut. But yeah, I think I covered everything. That's more or less my thoughts on Astro Bot. I think it's a pretty amazing game. I do think the VR version was a little cooler though, just because it did feel like something so different. This doesn't feel as unique, though it does have that same degree of polish. It is longer than the VR game, there's more to do in it, and just the degree of love and care and effort and how much has been put into this does easily trump the original Astro Bot rescue mission. There is even more stuff to love here. I absolutely recommend it. Whether or not you want to pay full price for it, that's another story. I guess I'll get out some details to help you decide whether or not you want to pick it up. It's about an 11-hour game, I think, and it can go up to like 15 or 16 if you want to get everything. Not the most replayable thing in the world though, so that could make people maybe want to skip it or wait for a sale, but the core experience is so fulfilling that it is the kind of thing that you're going to be thinking about for a long time. If you have kids, it's a yes. It's a yes, because just the shared experience with all the references and stuff you can have for your kids. I think this is probably one of the best games for someone who grew up with a lot of different games to play with their child. Otherwise, I would recommend maybe waiting for a sale or borrowing it, just by proxy of the fact that AAA games cost too much. I think we all agree that $80 is too expensive for a new video game to cost. 40 would be perfect, but that's just the world we live in. I'm not gonna try and make any arguments over what equals what dollar. I don't know. It's subjective, you can decide that. But I do think it is important for this game to do well because the people at Asobi are so deeply in love with the history of PlayStation, and unfortunately there's a really big disconnect between the attitudes at Asobi and then the attitudes higher up the ladder at PlayStation, where there is such a wider disregard of older software, such a little focus on the magical weirdo experiences in favor of just AAA stuff. I mean, I probably sound like a broken record for everything you guys have been hearing. Do I even need to say any of this? I mean, for crying out loud, this game is like screaming at you to play Ape Escape, and the official version of Ape Escape 2 that you have to play on the same console as you played Astro Bot on, PS5 only, mind you. You're gonna download Ape Escape 2 just to find out that the textures are completely glitched to dickin' back on PS5. It's so distracting it almost makes the game unplayable. Like I said in the beginning, we live in dire times right now, but all I can hope is that the success of Astro Bot demonstrates to PlayStation firsthand that there is still love and interest in these types of games, in those old properties. I mean, the game is practically yelling at PlayStation, Asobi's practically yelling at PlayStation saying, please let us make an Ape Escape game with this one, with how much effort they put into all the Ape Escape stuff in here. And I say, let them do it. Let them make us a AAA, amazing graphics, super polished level design. Give us a super duper Ape Escape game, please.
Make it happen, Sony. But either way, all I can hope is that Astro Bot does well enough to show Sony directly that we still care, we still love, and we still want these little games, the platformers, the weird little characters, the quirky stuff, and not just the super duper graphics of photorealistic stuff. I really hope that ends up happening, because as amazing of a celebration of PlayStation this game is, it would be devastating if it ended up being a goodbye party instead of a little peek into what's to come again. So, I don't know. Here's hoping. Check out Astro Bot if it looks like your jam. Again, like, it sucks to recommend it on sale, but it's like, I think we kind of got to buy this thing if we want the future to look good. But you do you, whatever. Astro Bot, wonderful game. At least I'm glad this got made.
Hey, I know you're wondering about that Astro Bot VR game on PS4. I made a video about that a couple of years ago if you want to check that out and learn more. And if you want to learn more about Astro Bot, go to playstation.com/game/astrobot.com/dot/web/gex3d.